I want to welcome you here to Mount Olive Baptist Church tonight on behalf of our church community. I'm Jackie Bragg, and I serve here as an associate minister. I also want to welcome you on behalf of Justice Knox, a coalition of 23 faith congregations of which Mount Olive is a part. I'm currently the co-president of Justice Knox, and I am honored to serve in that capacity. We're gathered here tonight because we are concerned about the thousands of neighbors throughout our city and county that do not have a safe place to call home. Many feel powerless up against systems that don't seem to want to give them a break. Many of us feel powerless because we want to help individuals, but we don't know how. Justice Knox is determined to change systems so that our neighbors experiencing homelessness can get the support and the help they need in a compassionate and caring system that drives them quickly toward permanent housing. We're grateful to both of our mayors, Mayor Kincannon and Mayor Jacobs, who've worked with us to bring speakers and experts across our community, our state, and even our country to engage with us in dialogue to see how we might do a better job of solving the problem of homelessness that we face as a community. We're grateful for their investment in the new Joint Office of Housing Stability and to the staff that they have afforded us to work with us in organizing this presentation. We're also grateful to other faith leaders in the homelessness sector who work there, and we're especially grateful to Erin Reed, the director of the new Joint Office on Housing Stability. And now I want to give a special welcome to our guest speaker tonight. Julia Orlando is a national expert in addressing homelessness. She spent many years as the director of Bergen County Housing, Health, and Human Services Center in Hackensack, New Jersey. The mission of this nationally recognized award-winning center is to end homelessness in Bergen County. And under Julia's leadership, they made great steps toward that goal when they were the first county in the country to end chronic homelessness. They did that in 2017, and now they've continued to this day to stay at functional zero, which she'll talk with us about tonight. Julia has most recently moved into the position of Vice President for Integrated Services in the Bergen New Bridge Medical Center, where she says she's ready to push the system to change so that the neighbors she worked with at the homeless shelter can get the health care they need. Thank you in joining me in welcoming Julia. We look forward to what you have to share with us. Thank you for being here.
Can you all hear me? All right. Wow. Can I just say I'm so happy to be here because number one, it's my first visit to Tennessee. And I'm just so excited to be here. I spent the afternoon walking around and just taking in your wonderful, wonderful city and all the, all your landmarks that you have. But I do want to say one thing though. It is Women's History Month. You have a female leader here. You are the home of the Women's Basketball Hall of Fame. I'm just telling you that's just a little badass. And I saw the big basketball, and I got to get a picture because I'm a big basketball family. And I also noticed that you have a statue of your suffragettes because the final, I had to look this up today, because it was the last ratification was here in Tennessee, which gave women the right to vote. And it was dedicated, your statue, by your first female judge, Yes, people are going yes, right? Pretty amazing, ladies. I'm just telling you. I'm really feeling it here. So I hope that I have a lot of wonderful mentors before me, leading the way of really making change. And I was inspired by that tonight because we're going to talk about something that we're going to have to fight for. The way those suffragettes had to fight, we have to fight for this. We have to fight. In my new job, I really have to fight for health equity. That's really what I'm going to be working on in my new role, is health equity, because, you know, people's lives begin when we house them. It's not the end of the road, it's actually the beginning, as it is for all of us. So I have prepared a presentation. We're gonna go through it tonight. I believe it's being recorded. I wanna just thank Marjorie and Erin for all of the phone calls and the emails. And this is my first week on my new job, and I'm here. And and let me just tell you, I have a female CEO and president of our hospital who said, no, you know what, you made the commitment to these good people, you go do your thing, and we'll see you when you get back. So just a little shout out to her. All right, so tonight we're gonna be talking about homelessness being solvable. And this is so important because as advocates, this is not a question anymore, and it's not a thing where people say, is it really solvable? And I have to say, as a community that, you know, reached functional zero, it's the thing I'm the most challenged by. Even advocates, even people with lived experience will say, did you really do that? Did we really do that? So what did we do, and what does it mean? And really, where can you put your efforts into your advocacy here in Tennessee? So the first thing to understand about homelessness is how difficult this issue is. If you were to build a rocket, I could say to you, here is blueprints to build a rocket. We have lots of rockets taking off, right, in our country. I was actually flying with my family, and a rocket was actually taking off in Florida, and my kids actually got to see what that looks like. But it's hard to build a rocket, but we know how to. If you follow the plans, at the end of it, guess what? You have a rocket. Homelessness is not like that. Homelessness is complex. And so because it's complex, it's going to have what's called adaptive leadership to fully address it. So what happens in our communities, and I speak all over the country, and it's no different anywhere, is who is responsible? Whose fault is it that people are experiencing homelessness? Is it the police? Is it the nonprofit folks? Is it the shelter? Is it the mayor? Is it the governor? Who's responsible? We want to point at a person and say, you're not doing what you need to do. Homelessness is the responsibility of all of us. And so in order to really bring a community into a place of functional zero, it takes the entire community being involved. So I want you all to be thinking about an adaptive leadership approach to ending homelessness, that it's going to take everyone being involved, not one particular group or another. So in complex problem solving, we have to do three things. Number one, we have to talk. And I know that sounds really easy, but actually this is usually the hardest part because we don't always agree with each other. We may need a person to work with us, but we don't like them, or we don't agree with them, or we've had trouble with them before, so we don't talk to them. But the problem is, everybody needs housing, case management, right? They need health care, they need behavioral health, addiction help, right? All of these different providers, all of these different people working together. So we have to talk. The communication has to be omnidirectional, right? In all different direction. And it has to be constant. When we stop talking to each other, this is where the fabric, which is very thin, really falls apart. Second, we need to have a shared focus on a well-defined outcome. This is very important because if I were to sit down with all of you and I would ask you what your vision is, it might be different. And the problem with homelessness is that if we don't have a shared vision, then what are we working towards? If we don't all agree that this is the shared vision, we're just not going to have the strength together that we would to solve the problem. And lastly, we have to work together, the collaboration, right? So some people have more wherewithal to jump in and work right away. Other people may be trying to figure out where they can act, okay? But the bottom line is we have to work together. So just this last piece on adaptive leadership. And this is one of the hardest parts about this work that I think this group is uniquely qualified to do. And that is this. You have to change the hearts and minds of people about homelessness before your systems will change. That is one of the most difficult pieces here, is how do we get people to change how they think and feel and react and respond to homelessness. I worked in New York City for 20 years before I came to the shelter in Hackensack. When I came to this job, I did not come to end homelessness. I did not come to change the system. I came into that position because I realized that this was my home county, and everyone was going out of county and helping other people and feeding other people in New York City. And I know I've got some New Jerseyites here. Newark, they would go to Newark. They would go to other parts, and I thought to myself, why are they doing that? And I realized it's because they didn't realize that we had homelessness in our own county. I needed for people to not respond in the usual way that we think about homelessness. And I'm going to say some things tonight that may make you a little unhappy. But what we do with people who are homeless is we like to feed them. And I would have people come to my shelter with tons and tons and tons of food. And I thought, first of all, I don't have a place to put the food. I have 100 people every night. I don't know where the food came from. It was a lot of complications there. But my point is this. These were good-meaning people responding to a problem in the way that they had always responded, that people who are homeless get used clothing and food. Okay, so we're going to stay with me. I'm not saying feeding people is bad. I'm not saying that. But my point is that with my community, this was the only way they were responding to homelessness. Food, clothing, shelter. And when we do those things, we feel really good about it. But when we do those things, we're not ending homelessness. And then it persists, and we do that more, and it persists more, because we're not getting to the root of homelessness. So we need to change the way people are thinking and responding to homelessness. This is what I'm going to do tomorrow. I'm going to use what we would call in New Jersey a little street cred, okay? Been to the White House, got to functional zero for veterans, for chronic. I speak all over the place. I'm kind of like, it's pretty cool, right? It's good stuff. And I'm gonna speak truth to power. We have to do it differently. We keep doing the same things and it's not working. And so communities around the country who finally understand that and change the way they work together were able to reach these huge milestones. So changing the hearts and minds of people before the work even begins. This piece is to say that everyone in this room is a leader. You're a leader in your home. You're a leader with your family. You're a leader with your friends. In places you volunteer. You're leaders. So every time you talk about homelessness, you're talking about it as a leader. What you support, what you don't support. I think we expect people to be in these big positions of leadership, and we fail to realize that all of us are leaders. This is why, if I'm invited to a kindergarten class, I go. And I will talk to a kindergarten class about homelessness. Now, I'm not talking to kindergartners the same way I'm talking to high schoolers or a college group or folks like all of you. But this is what in my heart, when I look at a kindergartner, I want to know that in that generation, this is dealt with. This will not persist into that generation. And so when they collect little bottles of soap for me, and they do these little blessing bags, and they're really sweet, I'll talk to them about, do you know why this is important? Because when you give me a little bottle, a thing of toothpaste, people can brush their teeth, and why is it important to brush our teeth, right? Because when people have bad cavities and they have their teeth pulled, what happens? They can't eat properly. So even a kindergartner can understand the connection between their act and the outcome. So I'm starting even, no matter where I go, no matter who I'm talking with, I understand that because even as kindergartners, when they go home and they talk to their parents about their day, they're going to educate their parents just a little bit. And you want them to be ambassadors, little ambassadors. I'm trying to plant those seeds as we go. So I never really try to turn down those opportunities. So be leaders, go out and influence. Tonight I'm going to give you some statistics because I think that we can talk about changing a heart and mind, but we also have to have statistics. We have to know about research. So Greg Colburn and Clayton Page Alder have written this book. If you've not picked it up, I would recommend it. Homelessness is a housing problem. So they're researchers, and they went out into large homeless populations across the country, and they found that they had shared specific characteristics. They have experienced significant population growth, but have not added enough housing to meet the new demand. So, in places where we have a lot of economic prosperity and we have a lot of jobs, right? People want to go there. Think about your big, your big chains and your big companies and, right, a lot of the tech that we have, and people will move for those jobs. And that's wonderful as long as those communities are building the housing to meet that need. But what's happening is they're not. So now you have a place where you have a lot of people looking for very little bit of housing, right? And it's important to understand this because why does California have so much homelessness? We look at it and go, well, the weather's nice. Well, Alaska has a lot of homelessness. And places in Europe have, it's not a weather-based issue. It's important to look at that because people will argue that, well, of course, people go to California because, the weather's nice. 60% of the homeless individuals, or individuals experiencing homelessness in California, are from California. And 60% of the people who live in California, not from California. Okay. The second point is that the increasing demand for housing in this constrained supply of homes reduces your vacancy rates and increases rents. So that's going to squeeze a low-income and vulnerable population out of the housing market, right? I remember I worked in New York City for decades. There were parts of New York City nobody wanted to live in. And then all of a sudden, right, Harlem became a really kind of cool place. I think it was when Bill Clinton moved into town. We used to buy, my agency used to buy buildings for $1. I mean, and then what happened is then we couldn't do that anymore. We couldn't build anywhere. And so we went from New York City out to Brooklyn and Queens, right? Because you're always looking for what becomes affordable, but eventually, now it's very cool to live in Brooklyn, right? Very, very cool, very expensive. So I've seen that change over the years. So what happens is that in those places where maybe you could afford a small room for $600, you can't anymore because of this demand. So let's look at data on housing shortages. So according to Rosen Consulting, the U.S. underbuilt housing by 5.5 million and 6.8 million homes over the last 20 years. This acute housing shortage impacts low-income households the hardest. So for every 100 low-income households, these are people that are earning less than 80% of your area median income, there's just 55 homes that are affordable and available. For very low-income households, that would be predominantly the group that I work with, earning less than 50% of the area median income, there were just 36 homes. So what research was found by Zillow, it shows that homelessness increases at a faster rate in places where people spend 32% or more of their income on housing on average, a signal that higher rents seem to drive increases in homelessness. Not mental illness, not addiction, higher rents seem to drive increases in homelessness. So I did a little homework for you in my coming here. So let's take a look at your wonderful state. So 209,536, or 23% of your renter households, are extremely low income, right? That was the group that I said would be the group that I work with. And amongst them, 20% of them are disabled, 26% of them are seniors, and 35% of those people are working. There was a shortfall of 121,810 rental homes that were affordable and available for those extremely low-income renters. 28,350 average income limit for four-person extremely low-income households, and 43,186 annual household income is needed to afford a two-bedroom rental home at the HUD's fair market rent. So that's how much a family of four would have to be making on average, right? So this is what we call people that are getting priced out, right? There's a report that's done every year called the Out of Reach. You guys could actually Google it when you get home or tomorrow, Out of Reach report, and see how many, I know where I live, I think it's a person making minimum wage would have to have 2.5 jobs to be able to afford like a market rent apartment, 2.5 jobs. 70% of extremely low-income renter households with severe cost burdens, 70% of your extremely low-income renter households are severely cost burdened, which means they're right on, one bad thing happens. One bad thing happens. So what is functional zero? Functional zero is defined by reaching functional zero where we have less people coming into homelessness than we have leaving. So you're housing people at a higher number equal to or higher than people coming in. So for functional zero for me, if 3 people come into homelessness, I have to house at least 3 or 4 or more to sustain functional zero. So we did this great work, right? And then we had a pandemic, which was like really getting tested in how we were going to continue to do that. So what does it take for a community to get to zero? So ending chronic homelessness takes political will. That's first, and I put that first for a reason, because it's very important that you have political will supporting these efforts. In Bergen County, it was our political will that made the decision that no one should live on the streets. You also want to have leadership in different areas. You want to have collaboration, coordination among multiple state and local programs to align resources for housing and supportive services. So I also wanted to share this with you tonight. So we belong to Community Solutions. Community Solutions is a national, it's hard to even describe what it is. They came out of New York City, and Community Solutions is a group of amazing people helping communities to end homelessness around the country. We've been a community solution community since 2011. And the reason I joined was because when I worked in New York City, Roseanne Haggerty ran an agency, and I was working in housing. I was housing people with serious mental illness and addiction and criminal history. And they had opened a new facility in New York City, and it was called the Christopher. And it was in the middle of Manhattan, in like nice Manhattan, like not where most of your social services. It was like Midtown. And on one side of the building, it was a program for young adults. and it was like 18 to 24-year-olds, and people came in and they saved their money and they taught them job skills with this whole idea of diverting young people out of homelessness. And on the other side was affordable housing for people. And as a young person, in my 20s, I remember going there and thinking, the thing that I really didn't like about my job is everything about my job was in a basement. It didn't look very nice. I mean, it was good work we were doing, but it never occurred to me that it could look that nice. Like, they had a vision that was so different, and it inspired me for the rest of my career that I want to have better things for people. Because why would somebody come off the street if it doesn't look nice and it doesn't look safe and it doesn't look clean? I wouldn't. So when they started Community Solutions and I saw it and I thought to myself, I don't know what that woman's doing, but I want to be part of it, because she inspired my work every day. And now, I call her friend, and I've done, I've been on NPR, if any of you know what the NPR is, by me, which my husband didn't know. I had to explain to him. It was the most scared I've ever been doing an interview with NPR. And he goes, Julia, you've done interviews everywhere. Why are you so nervous? And I said, because really smart people listen to NPR. Okay, that's why. But we joined Community Solutions because I believed in their mission, and I believed if anybody could do this, it would be them. And so we have this Community Solutions. This is 150 communities strong. 14 communities have achieved functional zero for either chronic or veteran. 14 communities, so you can see them here. I wanted to make sure that I listed them all for you so you could see them. If you see 2 asterisks, it means that they're what's called a double zero community. We are a double zero community. Rockford, Illinois is a double zero community. Abilene, Texas, and Crater Region, Virginia, and the Gulf Coast of Mississippi. So these are all very different places. This is not all on the East Coast, right? This is all over our country. These communities have actually reached functional zero. And guess what? One of them is in Tennessee. So I'm going to share a little bit about this, because I can talk to you all night about New Jersey, but you're not going to be really that interested. But you might be interested to know that not very far from here, and I did spell this right? Because I double-checked it a few times. I'm like, does it have that many T's and that many O's? Chattanooga, Tennessee. So the continuum of care for Chattanooga and Southeast Tennessee is a jurisdiction that covers 47 cities. That's big. 47 cities and 11 counties. So they joined Built for Zero in early 2016. They became the 11th community in the country to reach functional zero for veteran homelessness in October 2019. This milestone demonstrated that there were fewer veterans experiencing homelessness that can be routinely housed within a month. Remember I was saying people are coming in, right? They're equal or more are going out. So how'd they do it, right? So as part of Built for Zero, Chattanooga changed how its homeless response system works by adopting the core elements of the Built for Zero methodology. Number 1, and remember I talked about a shared vision, building a unified regional team or command center. That's what we did in Bergen County. The center that I ran became our command center. Remember, because if you have a command center, guess what you're doing? You're communicating. That's what the command center is for. It's a place for everybody to communicate. It includes 10 agencies that serve 47 cities and 11 counties around a shared aim of getting to functional zero. I am telling you too, these agencies have missions to do other things. But when they're working together here, they're working together to end homelessness. This is really an important piece of this. So for example, let's say you're in, I was talking to Drew in the back, who does a wonderful person, and he does a food pantry, right? We talked about, people coming in, low barrier, people can get food. But what we want to do is we know that people who are coming in for food are housing insecure. We know this. We don't even have to have them fill out a piece of paper. We know if you're going to a food pantry, right? It's tight. And so you may be someone running a food pantry and your focus is on food, but how does it change when you're part of an effort to end homelessness? What looks different there? You're still doing food, but maybe we're doing that differently together. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. So here you have a command center. They're using real-time person-specific data. So you have to have good data. And what happens in homeless services, people are afraid to share their data. They're afraid they're going to be judged. They're afraid they're going to, their funders. And so people are afraid to share their data, but you have to. You have to share your data. It's like if you want to lose weight, you don't want to get on that scale. Got to get, that's one measure. Your pants being loose is another, but that scale, is a big predictor of, if that's what you're, of a measurement. We need to take measurements, and data helps us do that. Testing new improvements to their system that help them drive the number of veterans experiencing homelessness to zero. Not being afraid to try new things. Something doesn't work, you try something else. That doesn't work, you try something else. That's part of this work too. I've housed people that have had to go out 3-4 times. They went out, they failed, they came back. All right, what happened? All right, well, this time when you go out, maybe we're gonna connect you to a different type of case management. Maybe we're gonna do a different subsidy. Each time, we're working with people, right? Each time it doesn't work, we're learning from that. So moving from Tennessee to New Jersey, my community, how did we do it? We built a unified regional team command center, right? We did the same thing. And we had one building where we all worked together. But we had a shared aim of getting to functional zero. We used real-time, person-specific data to know everybody that was experiencing chronic homelessness or veteran homelessness by name and targeted efforts and resources accordingly. And we used data to redesign our homeless response and strategically target resources. So, can I walk around with this one? I like to walk around a little bit. Okay, so in Bergen County, like every other community I work with, we had challenges. The first one is resources. How are you going to pay for this? So we could all come up with a really great idea tonight of how we're going to change things, but how are we going to pay for them? So that's important because there's not enough money for all the services that we want to do and all the programs. And this is where people get really scared when we start talking about services, because people may feel like, is there enough to go around? Is my program going to get cut? And this is where it becomes a bit of a challenge. So how are we going to pay for that? Luckily, right now, we have a lot of federal money because of COVID. We have monies that have been coming in, federal monies that have to be used for homelessness. So people are talking about how are we going to use that money, right? It's a historic time in homelessness because we actually have funding. Because guess what? During COVID, you know what we learned? It's really unsafe to have people unsheltered. I was like, wow, really? Oh, sure. I wish I knew that. I was like, wow, it was unbelievable where people really, when people cannot be sleeping outside during a global pandemic. Number two, resistance to the housing first model basically is this. What we really are focusing on is placing people into housing quickly with no barriers and wrapping services around them. The negativity around this concept has come from people saying they're doing that and they put people into housing and they don't provide services. And you know what happens? It fails. So then they think the model fails. So it's important that in a community, when we're talking about how are we going to do the work with our folks that are chronically homeless, who are resistant to a lot of programs and rules and things of that nature, this is one model that we had to discuss with our community. The community mindset focused on managing homelessness versus ending homelessness. I'm going to tell you a story, and I don't remember if it was Marjorie or Aaron, but they said, tell this story tonight, and I'm going to tell the story tonight. When I was working on ending chronic and veteran homelessness, I had a pastor call me one night, and he said, Julia, I'm going to go out tonight and bring blankets to the homeless. Could you tell me where they are? And I said, no. And I'm a good Catholic girl. And I was like, no, sorry, I won't, I'm not telling you that. And he said, excuse me. And I said, no, I'm just not interested in you going out into frigid cold weather and giving somebody a blanket. And I said, but I will tell you what, if you find someone tonight, I promise you they will have a bed for the night. I promise you, here's my cell phone, call me, I don't care what time it is, I'll make sure that the person gets a bed. So he goes out and he finds a chronically homeless veteran that we have not been successful in getting into shelter. And he convinces him to come in. And I get a call around 11:30 at night, and the staff are ecstatic because this man that we've been trying to engage is in our shelter. And if any of you run shelter programs here, I was like this, be nice. Give him whatever he wants. Let him stay up late, give him cake, give him cookies, I don't care, just make him stay. Don't scare him, just be gentle. Not that we don't do this with everyone, but I was like, I just want him to stay. So the next day I called up the pastor and I said, you know, I'd like you to join my committee to end homelessness. And he said, I don't know anything about ending homelessness. And I said, I think you do. I do, I think you do. So from that moment on, we learned from him because he was able to make a connection to this person that nobody else could. I needed that. I needed to learn that. I needed to harness that. And this is how we brought people together to be on this committee, to use, remember we talked about leadership? He was being a leader. But he was being a leader. You see how quickly he thought he was doing a nice thing. Going out and giving out a blanket's a nice thing. What's wrong with that? People would challenge me, what's wrong with that? I said, yes, but bringing him inside is much, much better because we can help him, and from there we were able to actually house them. We had another story of, it was a very, very frigid night, and there was another person that we've been trying to house, and we were failing. And it was actually at a church meeting. So it was, I forget, it was on an evening. And one of our community members, Jackie, saw him leaving to go sleep outside. And she said, no, absolutely not. I'm going to walk you over to the shelter, and it's going to be okay. So she brings him over, and I get this frantic phone call all over, oh my gosh, he's here. I said, terrific, again, be nice, be nice. I said, how did he get there? Who brought him? And they said, this woman, Jackie. I said, okay, we'll get her phone number. So I called Jackie the next day. I said, that is amazing. You brought him over. So what Jackie did is something called the trust train. Okay, so that person trusted her. She was a member in the congregation. And if she said we were okay, he was willing to come with her. Because she said, I am not allowing you to go sleep outside tonight. Absolutely not. And what's interesting is we housed him. He had struggles, addiction, mental illness. And you know what's really interesting? The only person he would let go, he would allow to take him to go look at housing was Jackie. That wasn't Jackie's job. And I didn't ask Jackie to do it with anybody else, but she did it with this person. I don't think we would have housed this person. And do you know that this person also had a wife? And we were able to bring her back, and they were able to be housed together. So I tell you these stories because this is how we were changing the way we were thinking about homelessness. And the community members that understood that we had to do it a little bit different. But if you brought me someone, I wasn't going to disappoint you. I had the responsibility in that trust train to do the right thing. Fear of change, that's a big one. And by the way, people are not afraid of change. They're afraid of loss. It's what we're going to lose. So if we all in this room decide to do this project together, what do you lose? Maybe you lose, this agency's used to being the main agency that does this, but now in this new world, maybe they're not the in front and center in doing that. So people get afraid. What's going to happen? Am I going to lose my funding? Am I going to lose my job? So there's a lot of fear that goes into change. And that's why it's so important. The more people that are in the change, the more we share the burden of the change. And there's less loss. It's kind of like if I have this really radical idea, but we all agree about it, maybe it has a chance. And then lastly, agency investment in the system as it was. So people are, by nature, we like things to stay the way they are. We're invested in that. We want to believe the work that we're doing is good and impactful. We don't want to change that. And so being invested, it's hard. It's hard to get people to change their stance on something, right? So this is the beautiful facility that I had the privilege of running for 15 years. And when we opened it, people said, oh my gosh, it looks like what did they say it looked like? They would say it looks like a La Quinta Inn. It's got stucco on it and everything. And I would hear these murmurings of people. And they would say things like, I heard they've got flat screen television. I'm sorry, that's all we had. Everybody had a flat screen television. They didn't make, for all of us who were old enough to remember, can't buy those anymore. Of course we had flat screen television. But it was this. Remember when I talked about changing your heart and mind? We have a habitual way that we think about people experiencing homelessness. So when we see something like this, it was shocking. People were like, wow. Now, inside, it very much is basic, it's simple. But if you're a person experiencing homelessness, it looks pretty dignified to go there. It doesn't look unsafe, it doesn't look unclean. And to me, remember when I go back to my friend in New York City, and she had a vision for something that was beautiful, and people deserved better? I was like, yeah, finally. And it meant a lot to me. And I had pride in running this facility because I really did believe that when people are at their lowest, they have to go to a place that they feel is okay. And they already feel bad. They don't need to feel worse that now look where I have to live or where I have to sleep every night. So in this facility, which is a shelter, it's also a feeding program. So all my people in the room who do feeding programs, my friend Drew in the back and everybody else, right? We do 3 meals a day in this facility. 2 of those meals is to the community. Anybody can come have a meal. We don't check how much money they make. We don't care what car they're driving. They can come have a meal. So we are not only, providing services to the people experiencing homelessness, we're also people who are working poor, people who we've housed. And you know what's really great? We could house you, and you could come and have meals with us every single day and keep your budget low. But this is what I want to say about that. Our feeding program was the group that actually was the walk-in program. And these were 300 churches, synagogues, mosques, people, faith-based people in our community that were doing this program. When we put it in the facility, we merged these things. Are you following me? So people could come in and serve a meal. And you know what was so great about doing this too? All of a sudden they were like, wow, I went to high school with that guy. Or that was my neighbor. And it started to change the way those volunteers saw homelessness. And it was brilliant, this design, because those congregations were paying for the meals. It kept the money low for the county. It was a wonderful program. And the people, and those folks getting dinner every night, and for those of you who actually feed people experiencing homelessness, I'm talking, they're so grateful. It's beautiful. But we're also giving them a shower. We're also having them fill out benefits. We're also making sure that nothing bad happens to them at night and that they're safe. And we're providing all those services, but we're doing it together as a community. Because you know what? The food might get them in the door. So this is why this worked really well. Having immediate and easy access to shelter, this is a very big one because in my shelter that I ran, if you were on the street, it was really easy to get into the shelter, and it was really hard for everybody else. It wasn't a place to come to get affordable housing. It was a place that if you had no place to go, we were going to take care of you, we were going to bring you in. What happens in a lot of shelters is you line up and who gets in first comes in. That's not a way to run a shelter, because who's getting online first? Not your disabled people, your people who know what time it is, right? Who can get there. The people who really need it don't make it on time, forget, maybe they're asleep, maybe they can't move very quickly. So that old way of first come, first served is not equitable. It just isn't. Homelessness is not a place where you want to do first come, first served. And it's important. It's an important shift to have. So your shelter, person outside should always be able to get into your shelter. We made sure of that. But also, your shelter has to have an open door in the front and a back door open in the back. If people are not exiting to housing, your shelter is just going to fill up and you become housing. So shelters actually have to be places for housing. A culture of collaboration, I talked about this before. I also want to just bring this one piece in too. I think part of why we were very successful is that as a director, I wanted to meet the needs of the people that were in my charge, but I also wanted to meet the needs of my community. And so those are hard things to do. Any of you who ever tried to do this, you know what I'm talking about. How do you set a curfew, right? How do you set curfew? You don't want people out at 10 o'clock at night, but you want people to come in. And that's just one of many questions. So what we did is we had a curfew that was 6 o'clock at night, finally. But you know what? If you worked, you got a pass. And if you had treatment, you got a pass. And if your kids were with social services, you had to go visit them, you got a pass. You didn't get a pass if it was your birthday and you want to go party out in the street. Nope, can't have a pass for that. Can't have a pass for that. And they'd say, well, you know, it's my birthday, where can I celebrate my birthday? And I would look at someone and I go, where can they celebrate their birthday? And they look at me and they go, in my own apartment. I go, that's right, so get to it. You want to sleep till 10 o'clock on a Sunday? I don't blame you. You know where you can do that? In my own apartment. I don't want them falling in love with the shelter. I don't want it to be a place that becomes the same comforts of home. And people were surprised by that when I did that. They expected to see wreaths. I said, first of all, there's no children here. This is an adult shelter. And number two, it's not their home. I want people to want to go home. The two things that I focused on as the director were clean and safe. Clean and safe. No bugs, no violence. Nobody was going to put their hands on anybody. When people put their head down at night, especially women, I wanted them to close their eyes and rest, because they knew that that's the kind of place that this was. But it wasn't going to be a place where we were fixing everything. We focused on getting people to housing. So they would say, hey, listen, I need to get my hip replacement and I'm gonna be out for a couple weeks. I'd be like, nope, we're not working on that. We're gonna work on housing and then you can recover in your own apartment. So let's focus on the housing. That's not a thing people are comfortable doing. It's shifting your work to making what you're doing is about actually housing people in the community. The last piece here is the volunteerism, the stories I told you. Don't bring me food. I have food. I have marvelous congregations that bring people food every day. I don't need your food. If you bring me food, I will feed the staff because they don't make nearly enough. And I'm going to tell you right to your face, I'm going to feed the staff. So if you're going to donate to me, if you're going to give me clothing, it has to be brand new and never worn. And I have done that since 2009, and I took a lot of eye rolls and muddled comments. But I said to people in my community, you don't like the way people experiencing homelessness look in your community. Why are you giving me nasty clothes? Why don't you give me what you want them to wear? So it's like tough talk. So this kind of no-nonsense, which I can see you all think is very charming, it's not very charming in my community. They all get it now, though, because people feel better about themselves, too, if they can have something clean and never worn. It's all about, right, helping people to feel better about where they are so that they can work on the things that we need them to work on. So shaping volunteerism in a very, very different way. Don't go out and give sandwiches out in a park. I've had people call me up to complain about people experiencing homelessness, and I said, well, what were you doing in the park? We were giving sandwiches out. And I go, why are you doing that? If you want to give a meal, you can come to our shelter. You can pick a lunch date, any date you want, and come with your family. I open up to the whole community. Do it that way. Please don't go out, because we don't want to encourage people to not come. We want them to come in. City of Hackensack, the first week that I started my job, I went up to the business district and I said, what is your goal as a city? And they said, we want to revitalize. And I thought, wow, that's a big one. That's big. I said, well, the good news is what I want to do and what you want to do takes the same thing. We need to end homelessness. People aren't going to pay $5,000 a month rent in one of these fancy buildings if they have to step over a body to get into their building. So let's end homelessness together. And we did that. And I focused on that city primarily in the beginning. So when I show this slide tomorrow, this is what zero looks like. We know what zero looks like. But people need to see this. They need to see that a community that actually doesn't have people sleeping on benches anymore or in their parks anymore, you can revitalize. Now, those people that were sleeping on park benches and in the park, they live in this community, but they live in an apartment. And now they're in their community, and they go to community meetings, which I love. So it's very important that we understand the value of zero. There is a value to your community when you reach functional zero. I'm preaching to the choir on this one, but I'm going to talk about this tomorrow, about alternatives to criminalizing homelessness, because this is a movement that is coming through our nation and through states where we're making it illegal to be camping on government property. We really have to focus on alternatives. So I shared the slide so that you can be ready with the argument of why it doesn't work. There's no evidence to show, because all it does is move people from here to here. It doesn't end homelessness at all. So we want to engage in community-wide planning. This is what I did with the police. If you find someone homeless, you bring them to me. So something that you need here in Knoxville, your folks who are experiencing homelessness don't have a place to be during the day. So if they don't have a place to be, they're going to be in places you don't want them to be. It's just that simple. So when we opened our facility, it's open 24 hours. People don't have to leave the whole day. They can't be in their beds. They can't be sleeping. But our drop-in program is 7 days a week, twice a day, every day, open to the public. There's always a warm place. There's always a cool place. There's always a place to get water or coffee or just sit and be quiet or talk with someone or meet someone or use a computer. You need to have a place for people to be during the day. It's very, very important to work on that. And in that place where you're giving food and coffee and you know, we should be working on housing in those settings. But most importantly, we need to give people experiencing homelessness a community. You have that here. You have, I saw them today. I was driven around before I came today. They are finding community. They are finding it in little places with nonprofits and volunteers and stuff. But those places and those volunteers can't end homelessness. They can do a lot of things, but they can't do the big thing. And let me just say this too, and this is a phenomenon that happened after COVID. What happens to good-meaning people, and especially people in social work and all of that, When we need something for someone and we can't get it for them, we have something called moral distress. And it's why people are leaving our field, and people are burning out, and people are doing other things. Because there's just so long you can do something like this and feel like you're not making change. You're not getting the person the thing they really need. Moral distress. When everyone leads, this is a call to action. I just want to remind everybody, no one is afraid of change. They're afraid of loss. We want to engage others. We want to weave connections between people who think differently and value different things. Leadership is helping people accept loss. That's why leadership is risky. No one exercises leadership without a clear and compelling purpose. We don't have to lead when everything's going all right, right? But homelessness is not going all right, so we need leaders. Leadership is worth the risk. It comes in moments, everybody. It comes in moments when you have a moment to influence. Just little moments, little precious moments throughout a day, and when somebody says, "What do you think?" Or you happen to sit next to somebody at a meeting who's a person of influence. When you get that chance, you have to use it. I know you're gonna get scared and it's gonna feel weird, but every good thing that's come from my career was when I had the courage to speak up and say, "Hi, I'm so-and-so. You know, this is what I do. I'm interested in your thoughts about this," or "I have an idea," or "How can I move this forward?" We have to have the courage in those little moments. They're hard to see, they're easy to ignore, they require courage and skill to seize them effectively. Leadership is always about change, and that change starts with you. You can't hope to make progress in areas where you have taken no action. I stuck this in late last night. I read it on Instagram, and I was like, yeah, that's truly what I want to leave you guys with tonight. This is my contact information. You can follow me. I'm always posting stuff. I know it's late and I went a little over, but I'm really happy to take questions. May we take questions? Is that okay? Anyone have a question? So examples of me holding people accountable? Oh, okay. I get that. So in my old job, 2 jobs ago, when I was in New York City for 20 years, my job was to go into shelters to convince people to come to beautiful supportive housing. We had a new building on 103rd and Central Park West. It was spectacular. They were studios. Everybody had their own apartment, their own bathroom, their own kitchen. So they said, well, listen, Julia, go in with a gift basket. I was like, gift basket? I've got housing. Why do I need a gift basket? So anyway, in my arrogance, I go into the shelter, and no one's interested. Not a single person's interested. And I had a moment, and I know you've all had these moments where I thought to myself, if I ever run a shelter, thinking I'm not going to end up running a shelter, 15 years of my life. But I had a moment where I thought, if I were to run a shelter, I would do it so differently. Because what I was trying to do was pull from the outside, but no one was pushing from inside. And that's not going to work. So here I am, I'm running a shelter, and I'm designing the rules and all of that. And I remembered that. And so what I did is I believed it had to be clean and it had to be safe. But I didn't want people to be in a place where they were turning down housing. So from the day people came in, we would have a letter, kind of like I'm staying at the Oliver. Lovely, lovely, lovely place. What a gem. Now, I have a little thing under my door. We're so glad, Miss Orlando, you're joining us. You'll be checking out tomorrow. If you have any questions, let us know. That's what they do in a hotel. Well, we have a model of radical hospitality. which we borrowed from our partner, our faith-based partner, Christ Church Community Development Corporation. They taught us what radical hospitality was. So we call them guests, just like I'm a guest at the Oliver, right? So we called them guests. So from the minute people came in, we were saying to them, you're going to be leaving. This isn't your home. We're happy to have you. But the message was, you're here to work on getting home. And so when people maybe stayed for a month and they didn't do any paperwork and they didn't see the nurse and they were just kind of using it, just to have a place to be, we'll actually send a little discharge letter. And then the person gets really upset, and then they see you have a meeting to meet with Julia. So we have meetings called Come to Julia. It's a thing. And I would meet with each person, and I would say, you've been here for a month. We're really glad to have you here, but you're not working on ending your homelessness. And I would say, so do you want to end your homelessness? Well, of course I do. Of course I do. So I would have the opportunity to say, well, you know what? You need to get your birth certificate, and I see that you didn't apply for that, or you need to go get your driver's license, because we need to get people housing ready. And for us, housing ready means you have your IDs so you can sign a lease. And that's it. That's the condition. Or you have to apply for your benefits. So we created a culture in this facility that was goal-focused. So we brought them in because we had great food, because it was clean and it was safe. But if you wanted to stay, you had to work on ending your homelessness. And let me tell you something, too. If somebody had slept outside for 10 years and now they've slept in a bed for a month, it's real hard, especially if you're an older person, to go back out. But they have years and years of people asking them to do things that never came to anything. So it was really important that we had those wins to be like, we've housed 50 people before you. We can house you. And maybe we just got their benefit card and they got food stamps. But for the first time, people started to have cash in their hands that they had never had before. So it was like little changes. But the culture is not about saving people. I wasn't there to save them. I was there to end homelessness. So if you design that, then everything in your program is built around that. I hope that makes sense. Yes? Yes, yeah. So I worked for the Housing Authority of Bergen County. We ran the facility. So the County of Bergen put the Housing Authority in charge of homelessness. Think about how brilliant that is. So when I opened up the shelter, I had 70 vouchers, 70. I had those vouchers. I had housing navigators. I had people to do document recovery. And I had people bringing food in every day. And I had a nurse on site. I had everything I needed. And I realized in 2011, we're going to end homelessness. This model is going to work. If I can just get everybody to just keep moving in that same direction, because I had everything I needed. And so sometimes what you'll see, and there's other slides that they're going to see tomorrow that I didn't bring tonight, but there's one slide that we have that are boxes of all the different elements that we have that's like a recipe that I bring to communities to say, which one of these do you do and do you do well? Do you do good diversion? Do you have a really good low barrier shelter? Do you have affordable housing? Do you have political will? Do you have a good relationship with law enforcement? Like all those different things. We had all of those things. And in the areas that we were weak, that's the areas that we focused on. But the most important thing I had was I always had that political will behind me. And so people would say to me, Julia, how did you get the county to adopt this model? I was like, no. The county designed this model and found me to run it. So it's two of those pieces. It's having political will, but you also have to have leaders. Leaders that say the hard things sometimes, like I don't want used clothes anymore. And I know you don't like that, and I know that makes you mad, and I'm sorry about that. But how about you give us dishes for when they move into their housing? Or you can get them sheets, or you don't do this, do this. It was that for 14 years of my life. Don't do this, do this. Don't do that, do this. We taught the county what radical hospitality was. They didn't know. And we learned that from our faith-based group. That was my partner. And then they learned from us, because I was able to do the hard decisions that the faith-based group couldn't do. Because, their mission was different. Code blue was like 56 degrees in their opinion. I'm like, okay, no, it's not. 56 degrees is not code blue. It's 32 degrees. It's a state law, 32 degrees. But my point is that on the hard decisions, they didn't have to make those hard decisions. I made those hard decisions. And that was the pull, that's the collaboration where you're learning from each other, where you sit down and say, I think this, you think this, okay. And you learn how to prioritize people. When we first started together, my faith-based partner would say to me, Julia, we have one bed tonight, we have 2 people who need shelter, who am I taking? And I would say to her, well, who's gonna die tonight if they don't come in? That was my metric. And she goes, oh, this one. I go, that's who comes in tonight. And now we know that that's called vulnerability. But we didn't have a word for it. That's what we learned from Community Solutions. You have to make sure your most vulnerable have a place to come. And to do that means the people who believe first come, first served, they don't like that. It's a hard shift for them to make. So as leaders, we have to help them understand that and accept that. I know that sounds like a little thing. It's not a little thing. That's a big shift, to shift towards vulnerability. Other questions? Yes?
How do you handle addictions, alcoholism?
That's a great question. Yeah, great question. Really good question. Okay, I'll take smoking first. We have a gazebo outside where they can smoke. Now, I do a break, 6 o'clock curfew. I do an 8:15 smoking break, because I'm a nice person. I know how hard it is to not smoke. Now, if I have a chronically homeless person and they go out and have a cigarette at 1 o'clock in the morning, I'm gonna let that slide. And I might have somebody the next morning get mad at me and say, how come that person gets to do that? It's the equity thing, right? I said, well, that person's been outside for 20 years, and if I don't let them smoke at 1 o'clock, they're gonna go out to smoke at 1 o'clock and I'm not gonna see them. They're just gonna walk off. You, on the other hand, I'll give you a patch, you can figure it out. This was not the way things were done before. Everything was about equality. With addiction, and this is definitely the hard part, people were coming in under the influence, so we're a low barrier shelter. So we would keep people unless they were incapacitated, and that's a state law, and the police determined that. So the police would come, they would determine if the person was incapacitated. If they are, they would go to the hospital, and when they were sober, they would come back. We would offer them treatment if they wanted it, but a lot of those people got housed, still struggling with addiction, but we wrapped a lot of services, and a lot of them actually, their addictions got better because, listen, if you're going into a shelter that doesn't let you drink at night, guess what you're gonna do right before you come into the shelter? You're gonna drink it all, and in an hour, you're gonna be in really bad shape, as opposed to being in your own apartment where you can put your alcohol in your apartment, and you're not drinking everything because of a rule. So that's an important thing to think about too. And the same thing with substances. You want to be low barrier because you don't want to have those people not be sheltered. We based everything on behavior. So as long as you weren't fighting with the staff, threatening people, right, it's behavior based. And as my faith-based friend would always say, we expect people to behave the best that they can. So your best and my best are different. And people with serious mental illness, sometimes it was harder for them. And so we would do de-escalation, and we would use the rooms and maybe switch roommates. That's the work. I often would say it was more like running a MASH unit than running a shelter, because every night we didn't know what was coming in the door. But that's the work. Other questions? Yes?
How do you handle cats?
Oh, that's such a good question. So, up until the time I left, which was a couple weeks ago, if you had a service animals can be in shelter. And we have had service animals. We don't take pets at this time. It is becoming an increasingly more challenging thing. So what we have done is people who had pets, we actually place them in hotels at the expense. And it's not ideal, but until we figure that out. I've been to shelters where they have animals on site. I think that you just have to manage them well. You have to make decisions too, because some people have 5 dogs. You know, not one, they have 5, or 5 cats, or three cats, 2 dogs, and a peacock. You know, people, it can get really, really challenging. So you have to have a good policy. And also, what I find too is a lot of times the animals actually need care when they come in, and that's going to be an expense. So you also have to work with like your local animal shelters and find ways also to offset those costs. But I think for a lot of folks, they will not come off the street without their animals. Other questions? Yeah.
If you're taking a vulnerable person in because they're vulnerable or they've done otherwise, so the next morning, are you asking them to, if they can't work on ending homelessness, do they have to leave then? I mean, and go back to being vulnerable?
You mean the person like the person I talked about, like at a month? That person?
No, just the person that comes in, they're vulnerable, you need to take them in.
Mm-hmm.
What about the next day?
They're with us.
Okay,
They're not leaving,
okay.
unless they want to. I mean, we don't make people stay, but
In order to stay, they have to be working on their ending homelessness.
yes, but working on ending homelessness is working with someone to get an ID. Working on, and let's say, for example, I need for you to see the Board of Social Services, but guess what? They come on site. So I'm going to walk with you, because you and I get along good, and I'm going to go sit down with you, and I'm going to make sure that I hear the questions too, in case you're anxious and you forget them. And so we brought all the services on site that they needed.
So you need serving people a lot.
Yes.
People who are servants.
Servant leadership.
Servant leaders.
Yes. And it's a different way of thinking about it, because listen, if I take, Joe, and I go, all right, Joe, here's a bus ticket. You're going to go up to Rochelle Park and wait online, and Joe's not going to get there. A lot of the times Joe's not going to get there. Sometimes. So by bringing in all the services, we made it really easy. Joe can sit and have a cup of coffee, and he's going to sit down with an intern who's like 22, who's going to save the world and very patient, which is wonderful. And she's going to sit with Joe, and she's going to help Joe get his documents and bring them for the appointment, and remind him probably 3 or 4 times during the day that he has this appointment when he gets up, and then he has lunch, to make sure that he doesn't leave the building, make sure that Joe's still there. So it's a lot of helping people progress. We called our program Next Step, because it was whatever your next step was within the program. Yeah. And that, yeah. Okay. Oh.
Are there resources still available to them?
Yes. So the people that are housed with those vouchers, they all have case managers. So those case managers will stay with them until they step down, if we step them off the program. But I think what's really wonderful about our program is that we become a touchstone. So let's say, for example, Joe, we house Joe, and Joe's been living in his apartment for a year, and Joe starts coming for meals. Okay, that's fine. But then Joe starts asking for a shower. Well, Joe has a bathroom. So what's going on in Joe's apartment? So somebody will say, Joe, what's going on? Why do you need a shower? You have an apartment. Did something happen? Did he not pay a bill? Sometimes they're just not sleeping in their apartments because they don't feel safe, maybe they're symptomatic. The point is, because we know them, when they come back, we can intervene and we can say, oh, let me call Joe's case manager because Joe's asking for a shower. Or Joe brought in a piece of paper because he didn't recertify and he's going to lose his voucher. Or Joe maybe comes in because, he's asking, and he doesn't look right. He doesn't look well. And so something's going on. So we became a touchstone where people come back, and especially Christmas. Like, I always loved Christmas and Thanksgiving, because some people would just come back to tell us how great they were doing and to see us and thank us, and because their lives were transformed. And that's the good stuff. The good stuff starts, with the key. But what you really start to see is people come and they say, hey, I've reunited with my family, because now I'm living in my own apartment. Or I have a boyfriend, or I got married, and they start having lives, because housing's the beginning of that. It's not the end of the journey, it's the beginning. You have a question?
Yes. Earlier you said that no children were in your shelters. So, and we know there is a lot of children that are homeless also.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with that? And if you have no homelessness in your jail, what happens with the children?
Okay, so, and really important to clarify this, I have 300 people on my by name list. We reached functional zero. We didn't end homelessness. You're always, by name. So we have a by name list of everybody, right? Now, families and children are on that list. Women living in domestic violence shelter are on that list. We all have one list for all of our programs. So we can have anybody over 18. So I have had entire families staying in my shelter. Mom, dad, 3 kids. The kids are 18 to 25. They're all together. They can stay. But we have a family shelter. We have youth shelters. The important thing is that each one of those programs are feeding their data into a centralized list so that when funding becomes available, or a supportive housing bed becomes available, all those people are on that list, ready for housing. So what I try to do is get my community to focus on getting people housing ready, because if an opportunity comes, you can't take it if you don't have documents. So I'm like, just focus on that, and then as housing becomes available. So let's say a voucher comes available for a family. They have to take it from that list. And why that's good is because you have some people in your community that are mover and shakers and they know how to get stuff. And who gets housed shouldn't be based on who knows who or they know how. It should be on that list who's the most vulnerable. So if there's a family, and let's say you've got children who are neurodivergent or who have autism, right? That family is going to be higher on the list because you have disabled children. Or if it's domestic violence, you're going to have a higher list. Or the head of household is 20 years old, they're higher on the list. They have all of these risk factors. You want your community to be able to, if you look at your resources like a pizza, you can't give everybody the same slice of pizza, right? Going back to equity. So you only have one pizza, so some people only need a sliver, and some people need a really big piece. And the important thing is that the person who's most disabled, person using all the services, that's the person who should get the biggest piece. And that's hard for some people to wrap their head around. Because it's not about what people deserve, it's not what we think, it's not about, this is actually saying, for Joe to never become homeless again, he's going to need affordable housing with supportive services and an addiction counselor and this kind of counselor and this and this and this and go to the food pantry. He's going to need everything you have so he never becomes homeless again. Because the goal is to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring. Rare, brief, non-recurring. The only way for Joe not to become homeless again is to have a whole lot of services. But Joe's already costing you a lot of money because he's a frequent user of your shelter. He's a frequent guest in your jail. He's frequently in your hospital. He's frequently interacting with the police. You're already providing a lot of services and none of them are working. So putting him in housing, wrapping those services around him, he's not out on the street, he's not interacting with the police. The police can do other things that we all want them to do, and not this piece, yeah. Tomorrow, that piece? Okay. Okay, yeah, yes.
So you started out saying that homelessness is a housing shortage problem.
Yes.
I haven't heard you talk much about where you putting the people that you're getting home.
Yeah.
Ready.
Yeah. Well, that's the sticky wicket here. She said, you know, I started off talking about homelessness being a housing problem, but I haven't really talked a lot about housing. So what you didn't see that they're going to see, because tomorrow's a longer presentation, remember the part I talked about housing, homelessness is a housing problem, and I showed you statistics. What I didn't share with you, which I'm going to share with them tomorrow, is the data on who's homeless. And because what our leaders want to believe is that people who are homeless are mentally ill. And it's a failure of your mental health system. And I just was in another state in a community that this is what they believe very strongly. And let me tell you, I went in and did a community meeting and literally rocked the house because I showed those statistics. And I was like, listen, 500,000 people in the US are homeless. How many people in the US are mentally ill? A lot more than that. A lot more than that. I'm talking depression, anxiety, right? I'm not just talking schizophrenia, right? So if mental illness was the driver, we would have a lot more homelessness. And the other things that are hard to hear is, you know, racial biases, discrimination. And there's research on that. If you go to communities with a lot of poverty, guess what? You don't see as much homelessness. Think about that. You know why? Because the housing's affordable. Think about that. So if I'm a person on Social Security and I only get $700 a month, if I live in a community where I can get housing for $500, I don't have to be homeless. I can afford housing. But if housing is $1,500, or maybe just out of my reach, $800, or exactly what I have, and I'm not going to be able to eat because I don't have really good food pantries like you guys have here, that's what we call, right, financially burdened. That's a burdened household. So you have to really think about that. Lots and lots of people, you know, even like New York City. Remember when New York City had all those SROs? Do you guys remember that? Any of you, some of you from, you know, I know Drew's from my neck of the woods. In the 80s and the 90s, and we had SROs, single room occupancies. A rooming house. We had lots of those. That's where people lived. Well, you know, when they got sold or redeveloped, or other words we use, we lost those. Well, where do those people go now? So it's you know, to say that tomorrow or anywhere or any presentation that I give, you have to talk about housing. Because even if you take a person who has an addiction or a mental illness and you treat that addiction or that mental illness, they still need housing. They still need housing. We don't have enough housing, and what the problem is that the people who are most likely, the folks we're talking about, are the least likely in a competitive market to ever see an apartment. That's really what they're going to see tomorrow. It's not because they have a mental illness or because they have an addiction that they're unsheltered. It's because they're least likely to compete for the little housing that you have for lots of different reasons. So yes, I'm going to talk about that because I can't not talk about that because it's the only thing that ends homelessness is housing. Now, again, we can manage homelessness, build shelters, feed people, clothe them, you know, have all kinds of services for them, but we're not going to end homelessness. And, you know, I've even had communities get angry, not communities, agencies get angry when we reach functional zero. I had one agency call me, I thought she was calling to congratulate, and she was yelling at me because she thought she was going to lose her funding. I thought, well, if anything, they're going to look at the fact that you're using your funding well. You're going to get more funding. So people are very afraid of that agency investment piece. So I promise you, I will be talking about that. Other questions? Yes?
Did that 300 person number change much over the years, or is that been fairly constant?
It's a little bit higher now, but what we have to notice too is it's not, they're not people chronic on that list. So it's 300 people that include people at what we call at risk. So for a lot of housing, you can only use that housing for people that are chronic in a community. We actually, because we've reached functional zero, can now house other people that are not chronic. Hope that makes sense. Oh, I don't think I can answer that question. I'll try to find that answer out for you guys, and I'll let my friends in the back know. How many supportive housing units? Not enough, if that's what you're asking me. No, not enough. No community has enough, which is also why you have to look at it like there's lots of different options for people. Sometimes it's reunification. It's going with family, especially we have a lot of seniors, people in their 70s, 80s, 90s, who we could reunify them with family. Other people can do shared housing together. Some people can do veteran housing. Some people can, you have to look at it like different pots and where those can be used in your community. Those are leveraging your resources. Tomorrow can you answer that for me? Because I don't know if I'll say it right.
Sure. Tomorrow is the both mayors, city and county, leadership summit on homelessness. So our target audience, Julie is going to give an expanded version of this talk to elected officials, faith leaders, and leaders of homeless serving organizations. We do also have some leaders in the business community who will be there. And hopefully we're going to have a conversation very similar to this one.
Is that open to the public?
So yes, because we're going to have multiple elected officials there, it falls under Open Meetings Act. It's going to be at the Boundary, Rural Square Park, from 8 a.m. until noon. And I worked a lot of pancakes, so if you want to show up and eat some pancakes and take part in the conversation, you're welcome.
So this is my dress rehearsal. So no, this is definitely an abbreviated version. Tomorrow, and I fully expect some tough questions, and I often get very, very tough questions. I'll have mayors from other communities say to me, so Julia, if you had somebody who had serious mental illness and has an addiction, and they're, living in a tent outside, and they have, and he was adding on, he would say, what would you do? And I said, I would house them. I said, you're not going to like what I'm going to say, but my answer is, I'm going to house them. I'm here to talk about ending homelessness, right? That's what I thought I was called here to do. But the important thing is that I'm a community who did it. And let me tell you something, my community is not different than any other community. We don't have smarter people or more motivated people or people experiencing homelessness are different. We just had all the right elements and we worked together towards a common goal. That's really how we got there, but we had the housing because we had a housing authority that was committed in that goal. So that's pretty rare to see a housing authority actually run a shelter. You're not going to see that anywhere else in the country. Yes.
Did I understand that your measure of functional zero is a consolidation of all the needs for all the agencies across the city? Or is it a measure based on the in and out of your shelter?
That's a good question. So, no, it's the whole system. It's the whole system.
Section 8 requests and
Well, it doesn't come from, So to be on our by name list, you have to be homeless or in danger of homelessness. So it would not be the same as someone who's on a Section 8 waiting list, no. That's different. Right, so they still maintain that. So this is, this is a special list. So anybody experiencing homelessness, no matter where they come in the system, has an assessment that's done, and that puts them onto this list, and they also have a vulnerability score along with it too. So you have people at the top that have like 8 to 12 numbers are going to be people who need a lot of services and definitely need permanent supportive housing. On the bottom, you might see somebody that has a job but needs a security deposit, and that's the intervention. That's really all they need. So it ranges differently, and so based on the vulnerability numbers, also their income, you can say, okay, these people can do rapid rehousing. These, based on all of these different things is how your community is really smartly using your resources. Yes?
Across all the disability criteria you're using, what's the average number of days that you shelter your people?
Okay. I wasn't sure if there was another part to that. So it has to be under 90 for us to sustain functional zero. So I believe the last time I looked at it was like 64, which is higher than I'd like it to be. It's been in the 50s before, but it's been creeping upwards lately. And the reason for that, just very quickly, is COVID really affected my part of the country because people were fleeing New York City and then flooding into the suburbs outside, which is where I live, and people were selling their homes for ridiculous amounts of money. So now they had a lot of cash, and they have no evictions, and they're good credit. And you know what? They didn't want to buy something because it was a seller's market, so they flooded the rental, right? So now you have those folks. You also have landlords that just went through legal mandates that they couldn't discharge people, so they're waiting around for a long time, and it hardened people around landlords around people with like Section 8 used to be like the golden ticket. If you had a Section 8, landlords wanted that, right? Because that's guaranteed income. But after COVID, it was taking us longer to find places, even though we had subsidies in hand. So I had subsidies, I had a way to go to housing. We had, our housing numbers went down. Our market got more competitive. And when that happens, those numbers, your length of stay goes up.
64 days is a little bit over 2 months.
Yes.
You were talking about if they're not in process.
Yeah. Oh, I know where you're going with this. Okay. I don't care if you're in shelter for a year with me. If you're working on it and it's not your fault, you're not leaving. Like, we're a 90-day shelter. We're an emergency shelter. That's what we're licensed as. But I had people, especially like single moms, young people, 20-year-old, 22-year-old trying to get an apartment, people with a serious mental illness. We would let them stay, of course, because they were still working on it. It's the person that's not working towards it. Hope that makes sense? Okay. Yeah.
I just would like to say to Erin and Marjorie and whoever, I think this is fabulous.
Oh, thank you. Good job. Thank you. Yes.
It strikes me that if I were homeless, if I was homeless,
Yeah.
and I learned that Bergen County and several others
I know where he's going to.
dealt with this, and I'm struggling.
Yeah.
Boy, I think I might want to travel with
Yeah.
Bergen County, and I'm wondering,
Yeah.
does that happen?
So what's going to happen is you're going to come to Bergen County. I'm going to find out pretty quickly where you're really from. You're from here, from beautiful Knoxville. And I'm going to say, so listen, I'm going to let you stay for 72 hours, but you're going to go back where you came from. And I'm going to put you on a bus. I'm going to call a shelter here. I'm going to do a warm handoff, but I'm going to get you back where you came from. And, you know, that's, if you're going to run a county program, you need to make sure that you're serving that county. But that doesn't mean we don't help. It just means we're going to maybe talk to somebody from where you came, maybe talk to a family member. I have reunited people all over the country more successfully. And because a lot of it, too, is your benefits or the money, especially even in New Jersey, like, you know, Drew, I'm going to pick on him for a second, from Trenton, right? Trenton, South Jersey. So if Drew were to come to my shelter, he's within state. I'm not going to get money for him to stay in my shelter because he's not from our county. So I can offer Drew to go back to Trenton, or I can talk to Trenton and say, this is the reason he needs to be here, his kid lives here, so can we transfer money from Trenton to Bergen so he can stay? And if they say yes, we would do that. So we've been able to figure out how to do that with some people, because otherwise, then it doesn't work. So remember I talked to you about I used to do the hard things? That's a hard thing for your faith-based groups to say that to someone. It's hard for a 20-year-old intern to have to look at somebody who's crying and says, but it's so nice here and I want to stay here, and they come with the puppy eyes to me. And I'll say to them, you know what, we can make an exception, but I need a really, really good reason. So I've done that for some people. I've made exceptions, but it has to be where I know I can help that person and I can help them quickly, right? There's a plan and a way to do that. That's probably the most often question I get, because people will look at my beautiful facility and they believe that if you build it, they will come. And you have to have a way to address that, right? Other questions? Oh boy, the whole row, okay.
Terrible homelessness problem. And then the other, talking about development, high-rise apartments and all that are more likely to flourish if you take care of the homeless. Mm-hmm. We have really nice downtown apartments that are pretty high rent.
Yeah.
And homeless on benches all around. So
yeah.
They seem unique
yeah.
in a couple ways.
So let's take one question first, funding. So let me take, so there's a slide for them tomorrow, our funding. And what they're going to see is that there's federal funds, there's state funds, there's philanthropy, there's grant dollars, but predominantly it's county, and there's a county trust fund. And I have a whole slide because Marjorie and Aaron made sure that I have the slide, because you need to talk about trust funds, homeless trust funds, and using them in a way that actually can assist. So, and then the second question had to do with housing.
Well, the poverty level.
The poverty level here.
There's a shortage of housing, more homelessness. If I understood you earlier,
Mm-hmm.
where you have a lot of low income.
Where you have where there is a lot of poverty, in those areas the rent tends to be more affordable.
We don't have as much homelessness, yet we do.
Yes, well, not as much, but you also have pockets where you don't have poverty. So you have different demographics you just talked about. So, and you're saying, so she's also saying that you have high rises and you have expensive housing and you have people all over the place, right? Yeah. Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. Instead of me answering the question, let me ask you this. Are your officials troubled by homelessness in Knoxville? Why? Why are they troubled by it? Because it looks bad? See, I like that. So we got to hope that somebody who cares shows up tomorrow. Because, listen, and those, the ones who, And let me just say this too. I don't think people don't care. I don't. I think that homelessness becomes politicized. That happens a lot, where best practices or something that's embraced, if it's embraced by this group, well, then it's like a thing I can't support. You have that happens. I also think that it's hard for people to see a solution to this problem. It's hard to see, and this is the thing I'm going in with, okay, so where am I from? I'm from a place where there's 1 million people in my county, 1 million. I had 70 municipalities, 70 police chiefs, 70 mayors. So this was not like some little community that just housed like 15 people and we reached functional zero, and this is right outside of New York City. I mean, we're extremely rent burdened. We are the most populated, concentrated of the 21 counties is Bergen. There's no place to build. There's very little spaces to build. So hopefully being able to talk about this, but I think it's really important if you do have people, and I hope you guys will point those people out to me too, because they're your champions. And you don't need a lot of them, but you need the right ones in the right place saying the right things. So what I'm hoping is, I've walked out of presentations like this, and I've seen leaders say what I say verbatim the next day. And I'm just like, that's great. Like, I don't get upset because I'm like, that's great. And I could see when I'm talking with them, I could see their wheels spinning, and I'm like, they're getting it there. We need to work with people who want to fight the fight. It's not a popular fight to build housing for people. This is a hard ask. Well, yeah. I think one of the compelling pieces is the fact that Chattanooga's done it. That's why I have that slide, because I was like, I gotta bring some big guns tomorrow, and I need something that's, like when I go into Kansas, I use a lot of stuff, like that adaptive leadership comes out of Kansas. So I'm like, this is from here. This is yours. Like, this is yours. You have to do this. When I went into another community that were abolitionists, I was like, hey, you guys were doing the right thing when everyone around you was doing the wrong thing, and you owe it to your history to do the right thing. People died. Lots of people died fighting that fight. And, people, not everybody was on the right side of that. And not everybody's on the right side of this. But if you look at these folks and you say, they're choosing the street. First of all, nobody chooses the street. People don't choose the street. Look at what happened during COVID. How many of them went to hotels? If you offered them a hotel, they took it. So what does that teach us? They just don't like what we're offering them. So if you're going to offer someone a shelter bed in a crowded shelter with people that they feel scared around and they don't feel safe and it's not clean, and they're going to have to be kicked out the next morning, or they're not going to bring in their belongings or their pets or their people. I have couples in my shelter. Then they're not going to come in. So I think this piece of opening hearts and minds, and this is a really good piece for all of you to work on that when we're arguing, whether we're arguing that it's cost effective. There was a great article written called $1 Million Murray that was in the New Yorker magazine, and it was about a man in New York City, and they quantified all his care, and that it cost $1 million, keeping him unsheltered. And that was decades ago. So I think when we're talking to elected officials, I don't think people are bad, and I don't think that people don't care. It's that they don't know how to fix this. What am I going to do with the people that we're getting calls about? If they have addiction issues, they have mental, because they're going to say, well, what about the services? Why are all of you in the services not doing what you're supposed to do? And the problem is because you can do all the services, but we need some place for people to go. It's called homelessness for a reason. They're without a home. So it's going to be tough.
To me, the big question in all this is how to build that inventory of housing, different types of housing, yes, but when they come into the shelter, you're working with them to get them into housing. How do you build that housing? How do you create an inventory of that housing for people to go into?
Yeah.
What are the different types?
Well, I mean, for us, we had a lot of subsidies. So we had shelter plus care vouchers, which are like Section 8 vouchers, but they come with services. They come with case management, right? So we were actually putting people into the community in available apartments. So we you know, if you're going to wait around to build something, it's going to take years. People are going to have 2 winters. So we were actually, the easiest way is to put people into the community with a subsidy and provide case management. We also had agencies that did do supportive housing, and that was great. We had veteran-specific housing. We have senior housing. So, but what's important is this. No matter what you build, if you don't have a really strong by-name list so you understand who you have, like if you open up a 20-unit program, are your 20 most chronically mentally ill and addicted folks or people who've been homeless the longest, are they going to get into that housing? Because who's going to get into that housing? You know what I'm saying. So you want to make sure that you have this list so that any new housing that comes on or whatever is going to be pulled from that list. That's the only way to do this in a way that your folks who you need to get off the street and you need to get into permanent housing have access to that. And there's still a lot of diversion that you need to do too. I'm a big believer in not everybody needs a subsidy. Not everybody needs permanent, you know what I'm saying? Not everybody needs that level of service.
Can you elaborate on, you use the word binding?
Binding.
List.
Oh, by name list. It's my Jersey accent. By name. By name list.
Oh, by name?
By name. No, it's my accent, and I talk fast. So we know people by their name, so by name list. Did you have a question?
Well, yeah, I'm wondering, and you're probably making an assumption, but I'm asking, do people who have gone through the program, who've gotten into housing, do they come back and volunteer? Are they do any kind of peer counseling? Do they help encourage other people?
Yeah, so we have one rule that if you're going to come back and like work or do something at the center, it has to be a year out. Just because there's other people and there's boundaries and stuff like that. But I have a great story. I have one man who came in, and he actually was struggling with alcoholism. His family wouldn't talk to him. He came in. He was still drinking when he came in. And finally, he decided he was going to stop. And he got sober. And he came up to me and he said, you know, I know you know people at this hospital. I really, really want to work in that hospital. Do you think you could help me? And I did. I had a friend at the hospital. I said, you're going to go meet with the vocational counselor. We're going to do your resume. He gave me his resume. I gave it to her. She hires him. And he gets in the hospital as an orderly, something like that. Gave him a Section 8 voucher. He's working full-time for the hospital with a subsidy. He ends up giving the voucher back, which was like unbelievable because he felt like I'm making enough money, I can afford housing now. And he's been promoted. And they recognized him with an award at the hospital, and he told the whole story of having been in the shelter. And now his daughter works in the shelter, he's reunified with his kids. I mean, I remember buying gifts for him to give to his kids because I was like, you know, this man doesn't have any money, and I just really took an interest in him and really tried to help him. But I look at that story, and that happens. Does it happen the majority of the time? No, many of our folks are disabled, but the quality of their lives are better. They're not on the street anymore. They have productive lives, they're happy, and and in small and in amazing ways, like all of that being part of that. And those are the stories that you have to tell. But I think what I get worried about is that we have this mentality of like, you have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Like that's kind of what I hear a lot when I travel.
And you've got an early morning.
I do.
And so we want to be aware of that. Will you join me in thanking Julia for information and inspiration? Thank you so much.